Hello, Reformed Mythologist Nate Morgan Locke here with part 3 of my seminar on visual storytelling and, brackets, the God who sees us. In part 2 we were thinking about peeping Toms and peeping Mickeys and peeping Jimmy Stewarts. We'll conclude our discussion of Rear Window in this part, but we're going to start this part with a long quotation from a feminist cinema critic called Laura Mulvey. And this is what she has to say. At first glance, the cinema would seem to be remote from the undercover world of the surreptitious observation of an unknowing and unwilling victim. What is seen of the screen is so manifestly shown. But the mass of mainstream film and the conventions within which it has consciously evolved portray a hermetically sealed world which unwinds magically, indifferent to the presence of the audience, producing for them a sense of separation and playing on their voyeuristic fantasy. So she's saying there's a lot about cinema which is like being a peeping Tom. She goes on. Moreover, the extreme contrast between the darkness in the auditorium, which also isolates the spectators from one another, and the brilliance of the shifting patterns of light and shade on the screen helps to promote the illusion of voyeuristic separation. Although the film is really being shown, is there to be seen, conditions of screening and narrative conventions give the spectator an illusion of looking in on a private world. So when you're watching a movie, when you're in the cinema, or even now when you're watching this video whilst eating crisps in bed, whilst you're doing this, you're very much a viewer, a voyeur, and potentially a peeping Tom. You want to see, but you do not wish to be seen. Well, that's Laura Mulvey. She goes on in that essay, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, published in 1975, to actually coin the phrase male gaze, which has been obviously used in pop culture really ever since, to refer to a particular objectification of women within cinema. But it's worth noting, and we'll just take a little look at this advert for Diet Coke, that this male gaze may also be a female gaze and may in fact be an inescapable part of protagonist-led narrative cinema. Let's watch that clip.
I'm here for my 11:30 appointment.
I'm here for my 11:30. And 11:30?
11:30?
I don't want you to be no slave. I don't want you to work all day. But I want you to be true.
No wonder it's so hard to get an appointment here.
So in that sense, the male gaze is turned into the female gaze and is used to sell Diet Coke. We're going to have a think now about the most dramatic part of Rear Window. And Jeffries is looking out of his windows using his binoculars, and Grace Kelly, his girlfriend, has crossed the threshold. She's gone across out of the window, she's gone across the yard, and she's now climbed up into the apartment of a potential murderer. And because she's broken in and the police happen to be there, there's a lot of jeopardy about what might happen to her. Anyway, we'll take a look at this clip and then you'll see why it's such an important part of the film. So she needs to get the binoculars too.
What's she trying to do?
You can both see there's police officers framing the two of them.
It'll get her out of there, won't it?
And then she's going to point to her
Look, the wedding ring.
the ring, and then
Turn out the light, he's seen us.
so there it is. He goes from being the one who looks to being the one who is looked at. And that is pretty disturbing for him. This reminded me of a quotation from existential French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. he who said hell is other people. Well, why do you think hell is other people? Well, he thought hell was other people because other people could see him and make judgments about him when he wanted to be the one who was seeing them making judgments about them. So this is what Sartre says in Being and Nothingness, brilliant sentence. The look of the other petrifies me. It turns me into an object. So he wants to be the subjective viewer. He wants to be the one who's behind the eyes getting to see. But the look of other people turns him into an object. It's not just about the male gaze, it's about the other gaze, the being seen. And that means that you're not in control, that you don't get to be the one who judges all things. And that idea of being seen, of not being able to control what is seen of you, of not being able to completely determine how other people view you, however much you try and curate your kind of appearance, that idea is destructive for Sartre. He finds it to be hellish. But in fact, it is because in being seen, Sartre is existing as a creature who has been made by their creator. So it reminded me of this verse from Hebrews chapter 4. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give an account. So the being seen, this is a part and parcel of being a creature. To live your life coram Deo, before the face of God, is that before there is anything else, you are seen by God. And there's nothing harmful or shameful about that unless you've sinned. And that reminds us of Genesis chapter 3 and the account of Adam and Eve eating the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And that the eyes of both of them were opened and they saw that they were naked, and so they covered themselves, they hid themselves because they were naked, because they had their shame. And yet they cannot escape the fact that God is the all-seeing one, the one who will see them, and the one to whom we must give an account, Hebrews chapter 4. So the idea, the Christian conception of being both creature and fallen creature involves this idea of seeing and being seen. But we'll see as we go on now that the idea of sight, vision, is also deeply connected to what it means to be saved. So it's part of creation, it's part of the fall, and it's also part of redemption, is this idea of sight. Just before we get onto that, I just want to show you the final clip of Rear Window, and it's just a beautiful way to conclude the film. Here it is. So he's now got 2 broken legs, and then we move from his legs to hers, and we find that she's reading a book about the high Himalayas. But noticing he's fallen asleep, she puts that down, checks he's still asleep, and picks up a fashion magazine. We fade to black, and then so there we go. She sees, what does she choose to look at? What is she choosing to occupy her mind with? What is she giving her attention to? Well, whilst he's still awake, she's reading a story of a book of adventure and travel. But then knowing that he's asleep and she can't be seen, she then picks up what she really wants to look at, which is, of course, Harper's Bazaar or whatever that magazine was. So the Christian idea of salvation is obviously the Christ. You know, Jesus is the person through whom we are saved. It is the person and work of Jesus. And how is the person and work of Jesus summed up? Well, John chapter 1 verse 29, John the Baptist tells us and tells his immediate audience, behold, look, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. So look, he's the Lamb of God. This is who you're looking at when you look at Jesus. All that there is to be said about being a lamb, about the innocence of the lamb, about the sacrifice of the lamb, about the Passover lamb. He is the Lamb of God, the Agnus Dei, the beautiful one who has been sent as a sacrifice. And what does he do? His work is to take away the sin of the world. And so the sense of sin and shame and desire to hide that Adam and Eve have, that Jeffries has, that Mickey Flanagan has, of being the peeper and the PP, of being seen, well, actually, it is as we look to the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world that we will be saved from our sin. Here at Speak Life, we've been thinking about how to communicate that to people in a number of different ways. One of them is the 3-2-1 course. So that's an opportunity for people to see the world through the lens of Jesus. Glenn's often saying that on the Speak Life channel. We see all things through the lens of Jesus. And so 3-2-1 is a course that helps people to do that. It's a wonderful introduction to the Christian faith, and it, I think, holds up who Jesus is as the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, who helps us to understand who God is, what's going on in the world, and who he is, and who we've been called to be. You might like to check it out. You can go to 321course.com and do that thing just now. Also, there's an app. You might like to download it. You might like to send it to a friend. Please remember that media consumption is optional. You are under no obligation to watch 3-part YouTube video series about visual storytelling and the God who sees us. I'm Reformed Mythologist Nate Morgan Locke. I'm glad you are here.